Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. We hope to always remain an ad-free podcast, so if you'd like to help us remain self-supporting, please visit our website at sober-sunrise.com. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
My name's Stephen. I'm an alcoholic. I want to say I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I have worth having I owe to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's extended my life and bettered my life in ways I could not have imagined when I first got here. I want to thank Neil for that generous introduction and for arranging, my being here. I do live in Los Angeles, and my son moved here about 5 years ago, and I'm here 3 or 4 times a year, to spend time with him, and when I'm visiting him, he's often he's at work or doing other things, and I have time to come to meetings, and often they're those noon meetings. And when I think of Neil, and before I get started, I want to make this comment. Neil reminds me of like one of those eco tourists, the people that go places and try to make them better, take their free time and then go places and try to make it better. And I remember at the last new meeting that we were, in together, he raised his hand with an announcement, because he wanted us to try the coffee. He had put together a new custom blend, and he wanted some feedback. And I was thinking, in LA, we don't have custom blends, baby. We don't have custom blends. I think of Los Angeles, 10 million people. I didn't grow up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Louisiana. And the county that I grew up in had about 40,000 people. And my hometown was a county seat. We call them parishes, but the county seat, Marksville, and it had maybe 5,000 to 10,000 people. And it's that way today. There's a water tower, in that small town, and it says Marksville, where everybody is somebody, That's my first exposure to propaganda, because I don't think it was true, man. I don't think it was true. But it's one of those small towns where, most days are just like boring and drag on. But every now and again something happens, And I'll name 3 or 4 just to give you a reference how it's maybe a little different from everywhere else. There was a day in the 1940s when it actually rained fishes in Marksville. That's a phenomenon. Hit ChatGPT after the meeting, and you'll be able to find it. If I don't know if some of you have seen that movie 12 Years a Slave, that character that Brad Pitt played was a carpenter from Marksville, and the judge that released Solomon Northrop was at the courthouse in my hometown. So one of my mom's great uncles or something like that, a point of pride for her that somebody she was connected with had something to do with releasing the guy. Some of you, not all of you, are going to remember Johnny Carson. Part of his shtick sometimes was to read small town news, and he caught us twice. Once when we elected our sheriff while he was doing time in his own jail. And as just a side note, he won in a landslide. All my family voted for him. And his motto was, I'm not in jail for something I did. I'm in jail for something I didn't do. His job, basically, but still. And then the other thing was not as funny. That same water tower, as it turns out, was built just maybe 150 feet off the corner of the Catholic cemetery. And with the water tables and stuff like that, and maybe not the best filtration, there were some problems with the water there for a while. But they've corrected it decades ago. It did have a peculiar smell, though, always. So that gives you a flavor. That's a little small town. Every now and again, something would happen. We'd make the news. Now, I didn't live in town. I lived 2 or 3 miles out of town. You know, on some people call it a farm, some people would call it a ranch. You know, we had hundreds of acres. We had row crops. You know, cotton and soybeans and corn and we also had livestock. You know, horses and cows and that whole list of things that you have on a farm. Like we had them all. You know, we had them all. And my grandmother, most people today live in a nuclear family. The way I think about it, it was almost like more of a clan. You know, my grandmother lived in the big house, and her 2 sons built on either side of her, you know, on the front of the property. And we were back and forth to each other's house all the time. That's how it was. My parents desperately wanted to have children, and they had my brother and I, and they centered their life around their kids. You know, they were very social people. There was no alcoholism in that generation that I grew up in. So they were good people. We were Catholic, but the good kind. You hear a lot of stories in AA sometimes that people didn't have great experiences, and I had a great experience. We had the kind of relationship with the priest. He'd come to my grandmother's house. He'd come to my great grandmother's house. And he'd bring his girlfriend, you know. It was a beautiful island girl. She was my first crush, I think. My family spoke a lot of French. I learned later that part of the reason why they were at our house as much as they were is she spoke French. And so they would get together, and not too different from what we do at a meeting, where they'd have some coffee and some, you know, snacks, and sit down and talk French to each other, you know. So when I was in the 2nd grade, you know, I became an altar boy. I think I'd still be an altar boy today if that outfit still fit. You know, I love being an altar boy, and I would say, like, I was good at things. You know, I had a period in the early part of maybe the 2nd grade when maybe a little self-consciousness started to, you know, develop, and a little anxiety, that sort of thing. And right about that same time, I was introduced to sports, and you know, football, baseball, basketball, you know, tetherball, hopscotch, whatever you got, let's play. And that got me through. That got me through that next stage of my life. I wanted to go to school early. I wanted to stay late. I wanted to play. Whatever was organized or ad hoc, I wanted to do it. So it was good. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. So that was the beginning. You get to the point where, you know, I'm 14 years old, just a few days before I'm 15. And, you know, we just had a sports banquet, and I had my Letterman jacket. I'd lettered as a freshman, you know, for football, and that was a big deal in my hometown. And I was on the student council. I was a good student. I think at that point, I'd only been like a source of pride to my family, you know. And I had 2 of my cousins, and we had a plan to do something mischievous on a Tuesday night. And on our way to do this thing, it's not important what we were on our way to do, but we decided to stop off at a gas station and get a six-pack of beer. It was a Billups gas station. And one of my cousins had just received, in anticipation of his birthday, a brand new Ford Bronco. Brand new, like the smell, the whole thing was brand new. And it was fully loaded. It even had a cassette player, It was nice. It was nice. And we only had one cassette, and it was Leonard Skinner. Do you know that where there's that little riff, da-da-da-da-da, and the dude would say, "Turn it up." In that cassette player, we'd just go to right after "Turn it up," then we'd rewind. Da-da-da-da-da, turn it up. Over and over and over again. And but anyway, we stopped off at that Billups station, and we got a six-pack of beer. We got each of 2 beers. And in 2 beers with my guys, 3 farm boys, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. There was not a cloud on the horizon. I didn't know that I was going to be ambushed, Within 100 days, I'm a blackout drinker. Within 100 days. Not because I had some deep reason to escape. I don't know. I had problems right out the gate. I started suffering consequences right out the gate. And I think the ones I'm going to focus on today, a lot of bad things happened. I'm not going to tell you all of them. We're going to focus on just like the car wrecks before I was, by the time I was 19. I was in 7 accidents before I was 20. And there are these 3 particular days that stand out. One was on a Monday or a Tuesday. My mom and dad had bought a brand new car, like the only brand new car they ever bought before or after. And on Friday night, I asked if I could borrow the car. By then, I'd made 15 and I could drive. And it was a rainy night. On the way, I'd been drinking. On the way back, it was raining. I lost control of the car, spun out, and wrapped it around a telephone pole. But it wrapped on the passenger side, and I didn't have a passenger, And so there was that. Another one, unfortunately, I hit an ambulance that had somebody in it. And that we had to go to court on that one. That was a bad one. And we had some shared negligence there, but you don't want to hit an ambulance, And then maybe the worst of the worst was at about noon on this particular day, turning into a bar, I crashed the car. And my dad we did all the things that you do. And that night I was uncomfortable. And after they went to bed, I took my dad's truck. And before midnight that night, I'd crashed his truck. So I crashed 2 cars in one day. And thank God my kids have never done this to me. But when we got home, my dad had to come get me. When we got home, my little mom, I don't know that I have the words to describe. It wasn't resignation, it wasn't rage, it wasn't it was I don't know, done. I'd been a threat to their emotional security by then, their physical security, their reputation, their financial, and it was almost like I was a terrorist, in their lives, because it didn't happen every day, but it happened a lot, And so that gives you a sense of how it was, right? And then till my mid-20s, so for about 10 or 12 years, I was trying to stop drinking. I had good people behind me that were helping me. I did not want to be this. I did not want to be this. I quit, I estimate 300 times. That's my estimate. Now, some days I would quit when I woke up, but I would not be quit when it got dark, you know. There were lots of those days. Now I quit forever, and I didn't make it through the day. I mean, it's sad. And it happened over and over. In all those, you know, it's 10 or 12 years of drinking. One time I made it all the way to 33 days on my own. Of course, we got drunk that night, but you know, that was my record. That was my all-time record. And while I was doing all this stuff, you know, I got it through a university, you know, and then I got the worst job you could possibly get as an alcoholic. I became a CPA, you know, and a bad behaving CPA. That wasn't a good match, and my drinking was progressing. I felt like, you know, the things were closing in, and I had developed a plan. You know, like I can't do this job because I can't show up every day. I can't do this. So my new plan, which I was like thinking of, was I'm going to go work offshore on an oil rig. Right? I'll work 30 days, and then I'll be off 30 days. I can't drink on the rig, and I'll be off, and I'll drink for 30 days, and then that'll be my new life. And but the walls closed in a little too quick before I could get there, and to save a job, I decided to. I mentioned to my girlfriend at the time, like maybe I should try treatment. I didn't know about AA. This was in the 1980s. This was in 1987. I didn't know about AA. I should have, you know. There wasn't an app. There wasn't Google AA. There was none of that then. And but I said, what about a treatment center? And she, as it turns out, she had been in Al-Anon for 6 months. And within 30 minutes, like she had my bag packed, and we were on our way to the treatment center. And she had picked a good one. She had picked one. It was Parkland Hospital. Parkland Hospital had a treatment center in Baton Rouge, and they did a lot of advertising, and they had the billboards and all that. But they had the commercial where there'd be an attractive, mature couple, you know, and the woman would look lovingly at her husband and say, "Thanks, Parkland." And that's the one we picked. That's where we headed. And I got there, and you know, they do the check-in, and I was horribly. I was still messed up, you know, and you do the check-in, and they ask a lot of questions, and I answered them honestly, and so then maybe they gave me a little medication or something, because I woke up the next day, and I wanted to leave, and they said, "Well, you can't leave." I said, "Well, what?" And then they brought out like the questions and answers and what I had said. I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe." And so that day they just detoxed me. That was a Friday. And then on Saturday, there was no programming, so they gave me a big book. And they said, "Go read something, you know." And so I started with The Doctor's Opinion, you know, and then as Bill's story, and There is a Solution, and those early chapters. And Oh my God, it just like blew me away, man. Like I related so much to how they described what was going on. And then the next day was a Sunday, and they brought in a speaker, kind of like what we're doing here today. And the guy was, just a little bit older than me, and he was sharing his story at a level of transparency that I had never heard anybody talk, and I really related to him. And I got to tell you, I went to the treatment center to try to keep my job. By then, I was convinced I would never, ever, ever, ever be able to stop drinking. But after that first weekend, I had a little hope, like maybe this could work for me. And as it turns out, I've never had another drink, And so right from the beginning, I've really liked going to meetings, Something magical happens at meetings. When I come to this room, I love this room. Some of you are going to relate to this. Like there have been times when I come to this room and I really need a meeting. And maybe it's the pine ceilings, I don't know, or what people say, or, just a smile, a pat on the back, we're just talking AA, the coffee, custom blends and everything. And something, magic happens. And there's a lot of times I just come here and I'm between storms, and I'm just here, and I just enjoy being here. I love, seeing new people and young people and people that have been here for a long time. So I'm going to maybe switch over a little bit, so you got a sense of what it was like, and then kind of what happened, and maybe move on to talking a little bit about the steps. And I know some people, it can be horribly boring sometimes to hear people talk about the steps. And if it is, I'm gonna apologize in advance. But I want to talk about some of the experiences I've had and my impressions of it. And maybe I'll begin. You've got a strong sense of my first step. I'm going to talk about the second step. And for us in our reading, that's we agnostics. And one of my favorite paragraphs in the book is that first paragraph in We Agnostics, where I think it just, in a very sort of concise, efficient way, it describes alcoholism. When you really want to stop drinking, you can't stay stopped. Or if once you start drinking, you can't control the amount you drink. It says, well then, if either one of those, you have either one of those, you're probably an alcoholic. And if you're an alcoholic, I had both. But if you're an alcoholic, you're going to need a spiritual experience to overcome alcoholism, And I want to maybe hold that thought and go back and summarize a little paragraph where Carl Jung is talking to this guy Roland and more about alcoholism, and they're summarizing this conversation. And this preeminent physician is telling him, "You're an alcoholic. I don't have an answer for you. I've never seen a single case recover." This is only maybe 3 or 4 years before Bill and Bob met. And I've never seen a single case recover. And then Roland asked him, he's trying to get a little hope. And it's described in that reading where he says, he says he'd never seen it, but here and there, once in a while, over the course of human history, there have been people that have had these vital spiritual experiences that were able to overcome their alcoholism, but they were very, very rare, very rare. And it kind of set Roland on this quest, and that eventually got to Bill. And so when I read, one of the magical things in my mind about this step 2 is, and then the steps that follow, is that you got to have a spiritual experience. But that experience, it's not like, well, let's go to Jerusalem, or let's go pray until we can't, It's a series of actions that produce, in a predictable, reliable way, produce this spiritual experience. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So step 2, I had to come up with a definition of God. I had this Catholic background, and I had a warped relationship with God when I first got here. I blamed God. I didn't think it was fair what had happened to me. I didn't want to be like I was, and that's how I got here. And my sponsor asked me to come up with a definition of a higher power, and that's that flexibility that we have to talk about higher power, or God, or even if we want to just use AA as our higher power in the beginning, that's we're able to do that. But he asked me to come up with a definition of God, and I came up with a series of words that didn't conflict with my religious training, but were somewhat different because I needed something different. I needed a new foundation. And when I think of my higher power, it's loving, kind, available, reliable, wise, giving, generous, fearless, forgiving, powerful, protective, patient, and present. That's my little mantra. When I'm really in a tough space and I need to quiet my mind, I go back to that mantra. I think the two things that may be related to this, that are uniquely AA. One was, allowing us, each individual, to define their own conception of God, rather than preach a conception of God. That doesn't hurt. At the beginning, it almost doesn't sound right, that you can just think of your own. But I think that's uniquely AA, and lowers the threshold for a lot of people, enabling a lot of people to get in. And then the other thing is the magic of one alcoholic talking to another, just like we're doing today. And so before I move off of this topic, I also want to maybe, in that we agnostics, I talked about that first paragraph, but there's also a list of bedevilments that a lot of you are going to be familiar with. And I use that even today as sort of an early warning sign that before I get thirsty, that maybe I'm having some issues. Do I have problems with personal relations? Do I have problems with my emotional nature? Am I prey to misery and depression? Am I unhappy? I feel useless. Am I afraid? Am I unable to make a living? Am I unable to be of any real service to anybody? Those are the 8 things. And for me, even today, there's the drinking definition, but there's insobriety. When am I trending toward fragile? And it's usually when something like that pops up. So that gets us through 2 and 3. You get to 4, and resentments. When I first got here, the word resentment wasn't in my vocabulary, and I heard somebody describe it as this looping negative thought, like thinking a negative thought over and over and over about somebody else. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of my hobby, is is to drive around in the car with a 6-pack and a pint or a half pint and think negative thoughts about my boss or my girlfriend or somebody, you know. And so I had that. I really related. And so they made me write down all my resentments. I had 154 resentments. And, it's not a record, but it is a lot. And then, there's the second and third column that just brings into, like, more detail. And in that fourth column, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or afraid? For each one of that 154, I had to answer those 4 questions. And I did that, and then it was time, just on the 5th step, I was sitting with my sponsor, and we started with the first resentment, and I got to, like, how I'd been selfish, and he didn't like what I wrote. Let's put it that way. And he asked me to redo it all, which that's why I have 155 resentments on my list now. And but he wanted me to write for selfishness. He or she did not do it, whatever it is, the way I thought it should be done. And if I'm going to have a resentment, it has to be somebody that has a little bit of power over me, or if you want to think of it that way, or I have to care about it, and they have to do something in a way that's not consistent with the way I think it should be done at that moment. And then I get a resentment. You're not doing it right, man. All right, I'm not pointing at you. I'm just saying in general. And that's how I get a resentment. And what I've learned before I get off this topic is, like, I'm wrong about half the time. Like, I'm getting resentments about things when I'm wrong, which caused me troubles over the years. So that's how we talked about selfishness, and maybe a little bit about dishonesty. For him, my sponsor, and I'm going to talk about the way I work the steps, and there's some variability about how people work the steps. But for dishonest, there were 3 ways. Like, you could actually lie. You could be passive, like someone could do something and you not speak up, and get a resentment. And then the other one that was a catch-all is, and particularly in my early life, like, some things happened and I just hadn't accepted it. I just hadn't accepted it. It's hard to get over that resentment until you accept it. So we did all that work. And fear, evil and corroding thread. I love that the way that caused more problems than stealing. Should be classed with stealing. Like, I didn't recognize. I was a big farm boy that I was as afraid as I was. And but I came to learn about that, and the way I reacted when I got that way, and then we maybe move on to the 5th step, and that was my sponsor asked me to stop saying it this way, but I can't come up with a better way to say it. Like, when we got together, I read my entire 4th. It's the resentment area, the fear, and the sex inventory. I thought the sex inventory would have taken more time than it did, but that's how it worked for me. But that's a little joke. Well, let me say it differently. I wish that was a joke. But I shared all that, the mechanical piece, and then I had to get to, like, my secrets, and I had 8 secrets, And when I wrote them down in my book, I didn't just write them out. I wrote them in code, And so when I talked to him, it was fresh, so I knew what each code meant. And I had 8 of them. And a couple of years ago, I went back to my work. I was taking somebody else through the steps, and I looked at my 8 secrets, and there were 3 codes that I couldn't remember what they stood for, So maybe God's relieved me of them, Maybe they're gone. And but what I say, like, my relationship with him is the most intimate relationship I've ever had with another human being. Like, I told him everything. I was in so much pain when I was working through the steps that I was willing to share everything. And I mean, every 10 days or so, and, we, with this sponsor, either we get together or I talk to him on the phone. So it's, I stay current. And I need to stay current because what we learned is that I have, if you're in a car, or a truck, there's a blind spot. I have blind spots. And a couple of them for me, and they're going to be different for everybody. One is my own physical health, Like one time I called him, I'd just gotten off a plane, and I told him, I said, my face is swollen. He said, "Oh my God, how bad is it?" I said, "Well, you can't really see it." And he said, "Well, if it's still swollen next Tuesday, we'll go to the doctor. If not, I'm being silly, but that actually happened. Like, it's a blind spot. My own physical health. I get overly anxious about issues that come up. The other is, my kids. I have an overdeveloped response when my kids are having any kind of struggle. Like, I'm all in, and so he's helped me many times just get right size about things. So that relationship has been key. I've taken guys through the steps, a number of guys through the steps, and when I'm taking a guy through the steps, to me there's like 2 magical moments that happen consistently. One is when a guy tells me his secrets, and I'm able to say, "Well, man, that happens to everybody," or just like bring it right size for him. That's one. And then the other is like when a guy comes back to me reporting back after he's made amends to someone in his family, and any time that we're able to like bring families back together and back to health, and I feel like a link in the chain, like we're doing something here, and so those have been magic moments for me when I'm working with guys. When I get to steps 6 and 7, I'll talk about them together. I use the framework that some people are going to be familiar with, Pagel's, pride, 7 deadly sins: pride, anger, greed, gluttony, lust, envy, sloth. And but he wouldn't let me just put those down. Under each one, I had to give examples of how that manifested itself in my life. Be specific. That was a common theme for him all the way through. Be specific. And then I had to come up with a list of contrary actions for each one. And for a lot of people, pride's a big issue. For me, it was a big issue. Self-reliance. I can do this, and but I can't. I need help. And so when I finished, I got through 6 and 7 with him, and I had to write everything down. A week or so later, I typed it up and I laminated it. These are my defects, and these are my contrary actions. And for a long time, I would just go back to that as like, where am I at? Because if if I can't drink and I'm uncomfortable, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to act out? There's lots of ways to act out. Or am I going to lean into the program? And maybe a couple of other things that were on my contrary action list was like to take risks. Not just play it safe. take some risk. But after working with a sponsor and with people, but being reasonable, but not always safe, And then the other one was, and it's really come in handy for me over time, particularly with an ex-wife, is assertive communication. Like my MO, because I'm, a good old country boy, is like, just be passive. Just take it, till I can't take it anymore, and go over the top aggressively. That was my MO. And what we've worked on for years now is like assertive communication. If there's an issue, just say it. Just say it. Take that risk before you feel a need to get aggressive, before you need to raise your voice. You can just ask somebody, why did you say that? That hurt my feelings. If you're sleeping in the front, not you, but I was going to say if you're sleeping in the front row, that would hurt my feelings, but nobody's doing that. So, sorry, I get silly. So, lot came out of that work, and then you get to 8 and 9 when I had to make the list of people, that I'd harmed, and then I had to be specific about the harms that I'd done, each one that was on the list, and reviewed it with my sponsor, and there was some people he didn't feel the need for me to make an amends to, and then we adjusted the wording on some of the harms, so it was clear, and then we set a priority, and there was a script, and I did it. I did all of them, and I talk about my family. Like most of my harm was to that, family of origin. My mom and dad and my grandmother. They're the ones that had suffered the most with me. And the thing with your family, like you can sit down and you can say it, and they're already going to be rooting for you. They just, like if you just stop drinking, like that was such a huge thing, But we needed to do more, and you don't know how much time you're going to have to make amends, And with my dad, he got cancer a few years after I got sober. So he died when I was 4 years sober. So we'd taken it to a point where I wasn't drinking anymore. I was connecting with them. But I was only 4 years sober when he died, and my grandmother died when I was 10 years sober, and she a couple of years before she died, we had to move her into a nursing home. I'll just share the story. I've never shared it before, and I adored my grandmother, and they moved her in a nursing home, and by then I was calling my family every week. I'd call my mom and dad, and I'd call my grandmother. Those first few calls were really uncomfortable. I was already living in California. I think one time my dad asked me how my TV was doing because he had bought me a TV. And but we evolved beyond that. But I had a phone put next to my grandmother's bed, in the nursing home, and I'd call her much more frequently than once a week. And she had dementia, so like it was the kind of conversation where she'd forget. Like she'd ask me, "What did you have for lunch?" And I'd say chicken, and then a couple of minutes later, "What you have for lunch?" And I'd say a hamburger, and then "What you have for lunch?" I had salad, and then at some point she'd catch herself, and we'd have a laugh. And but she would open up every one of those calls with, "I love you so much. I love you so much. I was sitting here waiting for you to call. And thank you." And then when we'd get off the call, it was, "I love you so much. Call me back." And did I fully heal what I did to them earlier? No. But did I put a dent in it? I feel like I did. And And not only that, but I got something back, you know. And now my mom didn't pass on when I was 30 years sober. So by then, and if you remember that setting, you know, around the kitchen table that night that I wrecked 2 cars, we'd come a long way from there. By then, calling her every week, I'd probably had 1,500 calls with her, you know. And I'd learned so much about her and her early life. And then as she got older, you know, rather than being a threat to her security, I'd become a source of security, you know, emotional security, you know, support. There was some financial things that I was able to do. And every time I went home, you know, there'd be a punch list. And now, did I ever make up for everything that I did to her? No, but did I put a dent in it, you know, as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous? I think so. I remember the day she died. My brother called me to tell me, she'd gone to work on a Tuesday, and on that Thursday she was in the hospital. My brother called me and said, you need to come home. I said, what do you mean? And my mom was in the hospital, and that it was really bad, and I didn't fully believe it, you know, but I went home, and when I got home, just to check on her, you know, and within a day or so she dropped into a coma, and she never came out of it, you know. And when I first got to the hospital, one of the things my brother said was, he's a very religious person, you know, Pentecostal, you know, and he said, you know, if we get to the point where we have to pull the plug, I can't do it. I can't do that. It's against my religion. And one of the things that I have from Alcoholics Anonymous is no matter what it is, I can do the most loving thing there is to do. And we got to a point over the course of the next few days when it was time to, you know, take her off that, you know, that equipment. And the day before, I told my brother, because we were praying our ass off, and he and his family too. I said, if God restores her overnight, you know, then we're good. But if not, you know, we're going to pull the plug. And we did the next day, and it was done. And that day, I had to get a suit. You know, I had to go to the funeral home and make arrangements because none of that was in advance. A little bit stressful. And then I went to a meeting and then I had to go to she had a little dog. I'd given her a dog, and when they put her in the hospital, they put the dog in whatever the place you put dogs. I don't even know the name. And they were holding the dog, and I went to check on the dog, and the lady told me that the dog was riddled with cancer, was really sick, that they weren't going to be able to find another home for the dog. She said, what do you want to do? I said, there was nobody in our family was able to do it. I said, well, I guess we'll put the dog down. And I did that really with the same sort of spirit. Like I can do the most loving thing that needs to be done in any situation, I believe, as a direct result of what I've learned here in AA and the support of my system here. So we did that. And so you can imagine, you know, that's been quite a day. And it's maybe it was a 7 o'clock meeting. We have a treatment center in Marksville now. And I get to this meeting, and it's Louisiana, you know, and it's guys, and there may be 25 guys, and everybody's in camouflage, you know. It's like 100% Louisiana camouflage. And they had an odd sort of format, like they'd read a paragraph, and then you could share as many times as you wanted. And some of these guys were new in there, some were coming off meth and other things, and some of these guys were like sharing, like just the impulse to share was like over and over and over, you know. And maybe about 45 minutes in, I was able to share at that meeting, and I told him what the day was like, and that Alcoholics Anonymous had given my mom her son back for 30 years, and that if she was here, she'd be thanking AA, and one of those boys in that meeting said, I've been here for 29 days, I'm getting out tomorrow. And he said, people have been talking about God every day. And he said, but I really felt like God was here today. And, I think God comes to all the meetings, I think God comes to all the meetings. And that was part of my amends. I have ongoing. I've just got a couple more minutes to wrap it up. I go to a lot of meetings. I talked about my sponsor. I've got the sponsees that I'm taking through the steps. My goal in life is to be a loving father and a trusted friend. That's what I want on my gravestone. Loving father, trusted friend. And I want it to be so true that when somebody comes to my grave, they don't say, "Oh my God." I want it to be so overwhelmingly true that they say, "Yeah, they got that right." And if it does happen, it'll be directly as a result of everything that I've experienced here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was. Sometimes I close with something cheeky. I'm not going to do that tonight. For the newcomers, I was going to say something like AA, where everybody is somebody, I'm not going to do that. But in the last paragraph of the 12 and 12, it's a long form of step 12. It reads, this to the end, that means everything that came before it, that our great blessings may never spoil us, that we may forever live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. And they read a lot of Emmett Fox in those early days, and in one of his books, Emmett Fox defined contemplation for him as when the prayer and the prayer become one. So in a sense, like your life becomes a prayer. Now that's aspirational. That's aspirational. We don't get there. But it's something to strive for. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I really appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.